Super. So I'm going to make a start. Jig, thank you very, very much for joining us. This is Jig Ramji, Group Head of Talent at the London Stock Exchange. Was it Global Head of Talent at the London Stock Exchange Group?
I mean, either works. It's pretty much the same.
The Head of Talent at the Stock Exchange Group. So it's fantastic that you're with us today. And I'm worried that an hour is not going to be enough, but I know you're a very busy man, from all the different things that I've got that I can talk to you about, which is really great. And I know there are so many areas, whether it be talent in HR, whether it be the London Stock Exchange Group, and also whether it be about your leadership and coaching that you do as well. All three areas I think will be fascinating to the people that are listening today. Mm-hmm. So first of all, if you could just tell us what you're doing now and what your role is.
Yeah, of course I can. So it has quite a lot of strings to the bow, this one. So as Group Head of Talent, we look after quite a lot of the people strategy at the London Stock Exchange Group, in particular, everything related to hiring. So recruitment, talent acquisition, whatever you prefer as language, but everything to do with recruitment, everything to do with learning, everything to do with leadership, everything to do with diversity and inclusion, and then everything to do with the way we assess our talent and all of the data that we pull through for the organization. And then last but not least, I also have a people analytics function that really look at all aspects of people data around people, around predictive analytics and the opportunity to use data in an informed way to help managers make the right decisions and or predict some of the trends that we're likely to see in the future at the organization. So that's kind of in a nutshell what I look after at the London Stock Exchange Group.
Everything to do with the people within the organization. And so can you tell us more about actually what the London Stock Exchange Group does? Because it's quite an interesting thing, and I'm sure you're very interested.
Yeah, so the group basically, as you can probably predict from the title, started off as London Stock Exchange, which is very much centered on what people think we do, which is around the management of the organizations that sit within the stock exchange, the FTSE 100, if that's terminology, FTSE 250, FTSE 350 that people would have heard of. But actually, the London Stock Exchange Group is much broader than that and has three clear business divisions. One is what we call data and analytics, where we produce a large volume of data and analytics that organizations, in particular the financial services industry, utilize to make decisions across the board. So whether that's your typical buy side or sell side firm, we provide a lot in that space, and they buy our services and products. We also then have capital markets. So this is where we really support organizations going to IPO. So quite recently, you may or may not have seen that Deliveroo was a really good example of what would happen within our capital markets group. And then last but not least, we also have our post-trade division. So that's centered around what, in effect, what happens post-trade. How do we have that intermediary group that supports a significant transaction happening? So for example, there is certainty by using elements of what we do within our post-trade division, so that when organizations make significant trades, there's that middle intermediary who just makes sure that it's sound and protect the interests of both parties. So that's our post-trade division. So as you can probably appreciate, when the COVID pandemic hit last year quite significantly, there was a lot of volume trading going on and volume activity, and our post-trade division actually had the busiest period that they've had for a very significant time in that period. So what we've got at the London Stock Exchange Group effectively is three distinct business divisions that help with what I would describe as the infrastructure for financial services to do their job, both from a data perspective and also from a pure out-and-out market infrastructure perspective. So almost like the glue that helps keep the financial services industries in tow.
Okay, so as head of talent, you are obviously in charge of all the recruitment into the London Stock Exchange Group. So because you are the person that is the gel of the financial services industry, what kind of people, what kind of roles are you actually recruiting? So what kind of people work within the London Stock Exchange Group?
Yeah, I mean, I think the really cool thing about the organisation is the sheer diversity of the roles and the types of people that we need. So as you can probably appreciate, we're really bordering on that finance or fintech type industry. So we hire a significant amount of technology people. It's probably one of our biggest groups that we hire into. And for everything that we have in terms of service and product, you'll need some component of technology to build that product. Of course, we have services and products, so you'd probably assume that we would have sales and account managers that we would obviously have within the organization. We have quite a significant amount of operations that we kind of need across the board, end to end. So we have a very significant operations division. And then we need deep domain expertise within financial services. And why we need that is because we need those individuals to come into the organization and help us architect and design products that are then built by technology. So, those are our most critical roles that we hire for within the organization. But of course, like every big organization, we also have the typical corporate functions, whether that's HR, risk, finance, marketing, etc. as well. So that's in a nutshell the types of roles that we would have within this organization. And we're very, very global, so we would operate across 70 countries, so we're hiring all over the world.
Okay, and so for people who are watching today, so if you were looking at a graduate role, do you have graduate schemes? What you must have a different number of different roles that you have graduate schemes for. What, give an example of some of those?
Yeah, so the history of it is we've had we've got a graduate scheme, which is certainly something that brings in different types of talent into the organization, and then they can do different roles. But we also have a lot of hiring that we do at the entry level outside of the graduate scheme too. So as an example, in some of our largest centers, I'll use a couple of examples. We have quite a significant presence in India, and we have a significant presence in Sri Lanka. We're also hiring in a lot of entry-level talent, especially for tech. And we're also hiring in a lot of entry-level talent in other centers like Manila as well in the Philippines, for operations and tech as well. So we've got the grad scheme, a very typical entry-level scheme into the organization, but we also have quite a number of entry-level roles across the globe. And our grad program is global as well, not just within the UK and the US.
Great. Now more about you. You obviously have had quite a long career. You're not that old, but a long career. Tell me a bit about your career, and go back a bit further. Tell me about how you went from education into your career, and then how you've progressed in the career.
I must admit, I think when I was really thinking about what I would do in the longer term, I didn't probably know that much about the kind of future path that I'd end up in. And not to say it was a bit of an accident or a series of fortunate events, but I don't think I necessarily at that point knew exactly what I'd be getting into. But in terms of the critical decision points that I had to make was what degree was I most likely to do initially, and it was a pathway between law and psychology for me. It was one or the other. And actually, at that point, I was invited to go for an interview at Queen's College at Oxford, actually, to study experimental psychology, which at the time I didn't probably realise the sheer magnitude of the opportunity ahead of me. But needless to say, I didn't pass the interview and ended up going to Leeds University to study psychology. And then thereafter that, I ended up working for a quite small startup in recruitment, actually doing assessment. So almost utilizing that psychology background. I then went back a couple of steps and took a graduate job at an organization called Fujitsu Services in the UK. I moved around a little bit and did different roles, sales, marketing, and some HR roles too. And then I decided I wanted to be a consultant. So I moved over to Deloitte and became a consultant in their human capital division. Worked in the UK for a period of time before ending up moving to Sydney in Australia, still working for Deloitte. And did consultancy for a period of time. And then my wife, who actually wasn't my wife at the time, actually got a job out in Singapore. And so moved to Singapore in 2012 and started working at a company called Bloomberg as their regional head of HR for all of the revenue generating parts of the organization. And then moved to Hong Kong. And then in 2017, moved back to the UK as the global head of talent for Bloomberg. And then most recently, joined the London Stock Exchange Group in 2020 as their group head of talent as well. So that's it's a whirlwind tour of the world. My career today.
And do you think that because you decided to go into the consultancy and go to Deloitte, the world suddenly opened up to you, and you had that kind of skill base that you were able to, transferable skill base that you were able to take internationally? Was that something you thought of at the time, or now in retrospect think was good or not?
I mean, undoubtedly it was good. It was the greatest learning opportunity of my life, and I think it required a significant amount of failing in order for me to realize the reason why I learned so much. So actually, it was probably in 2000 and when I say 2006, actually, I ended up getting a role with Deloitte out in the Netherlands for Shell, running quite a big team, global team, and it was my first taste of working in a different country. So, I mean, I have to say naively, I just kind of expected it to be exactly the same as my experience of working out in the UK, and I learned quite a bit very quickly because the way you manage globally is different. The way you manage globally is a real challenge. And that was my first taste of actually really not succeeding in a role and not being told that I was doing a fabulous job. And it was a real kick up the backside that I think everyone probably should have in their career at some point, because it makes you less complacent whenever you take new opportunities. And that was my first taste of it in terms of working globally. Learned a lot and was successful in the medium to longer term in that role. But then actually the next big opportunity to go abroad was, of course, Australia, Singapore, and Hong Kong. And that opportunity to work in the APAC region was a huge learning curve, because the sheer size of that region in itself is huge. The number of countries is huge. The diversity of each country is so interesting and something that I think I'll treasure for the rest of my life. Managing a team out of Japan and managing a team out of India and managing a team out of Australia all come with very distinct and different challenges, and to have the opportunity of leading that whole region and working in countries that I probably never anticipated I would do. Certainly didn't ever expect to be working in China quite significantly, working in Korea, working in Singapore. I think if you talk to me, if you talk to Jig Ramji as a 19-year-old, I don't think he would have said that's what will happen or the pathway would happen. I was a proud Mancunian. I thought I'd still probably be there, to be perfectly honest. And actually, I left at 18, and I haven't really ever gone back to live there permanently. But yeah, it's been my greatest journey in terms of developing my own capability and skill set. And there's no doubt in my mind that by doing so, I've really accelerated my career right now.
Okay. You were at Bloomberg until last year, and then you joined the London Stock Exchange Group last year. What made you make the change?
So I think I've been there since 2012. So it's been a fairly long time, and absolutely love my time there. It's an absolutely brilliant place to work, and I can only be grateful of all the opportunities that I had. I think when I speak out loud about the fact that I'd worked in Hong Kong, Singapore, and back in the UK doing the different roles that I've done and the opportunities that kind of presented themselves to me, I think everyone's like, wow, that's amazing. But look, the company's a New York-based company. I had been spending a significant amount of time on a plane heading out to New York, whether that was when I was working out in Asia, but also certainly when I was based in the UK. And I think for many years they'd asked me to consider moving out to the US, which again, in principle, sounds great. But we were just at a point in time in our lives, my wife and I, where we thought, you know what, we've done the abroad thing, and we want to kind of settle back in the UK. We just had our firstborn, and moved back to the UK in 2016, 2017, and so it was just never going to change, if that makes sense. And so the idea or the opportunity to join the London Stock Exchange Group, when it presented itself as a UK-based headquartered organisation, which had a huge amount of potential, and was really exciting. It certainly had been moving through the FTSE 100 at a rapid rate in terms of continuous success and improvement and continuous growth. I just thought it was too good an opportunity to turn down. And look, it's been a year and absolutely the right decision.
I love the fact that it's in the FTSE 100. as well as looking after the FTSE 100. That's fantastic. No, that's brilliant. Great answer. So I was looking up a bit about you and doing a bit of research, and there's an article that on you say how Bloomberg kickstarted your inclusion efforts. I think that was in 2020. Can you tell us a bit more about how you looked at diversity in Bloomberg and how you're bringing that inclusion into the London Stock Exchange Group?
Yeah. So definitely is very much part of my role here as well, in terms of really accelerating diversity at the organisation and making sure that it sits at the heart of everything that we do. So both organisations have a real parallel in terms of the importance that they are placing on this topic. Going back to the question that you asked around Bloomberg, I think it was one of those moments where, as an organization, as an HR function, or as a people function, we really started thinking about what were the one or two priorities that we really wanted to focus on as an organization. And you can easily get drawn in to start almost listing out priority after priority after priority, and he kind of, somebody asked the question, goes, but if there was only one thing that we did well and we really focused on it and did well, what would it be? And we got to this conclusion that it really would be to accelerate the diversity within the organization. And that wasn't because we just felt it was important. We looked at our own data. We looked at all of the markets that we operated in. We looked at whether it was gender, whether it was ethnicity, whether it was other dimensions of diversity. We all took a step back and said, we're really not very happy with what this looks like. And it's all very well to report that as data, but actually what we're going to do about it, how are we going to really change today so that tomorrow looks very different. And so one of the strategies that we adopted, and they're still working on this, I'm really pleased with that, because actually once you go to see that it still continues is probably the best piece of feedback you can ever have, is really having individuals or a team that's dedicated to accelerating diverse talent at the organizations. And in particular, what we did was look at two critical pieces. One was around gender and having more senior leaders that were female, because we did get leaders that were female, but we then got a drop off in terms of what we defined as senior leaders. So we wanted to almost accelerate that leadership population so that we had more female senior leaders. And the other one was really a little bit US centric, but it was centered around really fostering the growth of both Black and Hispanic talent within the organization, because again, the numbers just didn't look right in terms of the growth that those two particular groups were having. So actually, by having a real labeling it as a real priority and actually having resources dedicated to that piece of work was how we really kickstarted the efforts to not necessarily correct, but actually improve what we had as a current status.
Great. And how is this rolling into the London Stock Exchange Group?
Yeah, so it's really interesting parallel, really, because we've just kind of really started to think about how we want to define our D&I strategy for 2021, 2022. And again, what we've noticed is there are certain patterns that we would really like to focus on. And again, it's really looking at two facets. One is certainly hiring. So again, looking after hiring means that you get the opportunity to pull that lever alongside the diversity piece, and that's why they're together, right? But yeah, we're really looking at how we ensure that we hire external talent that is as diverse as the community that it serves. So if it's the US, it will have the view of the US lens, and if it's in the UK, it has a view of the UK lens. And just making sure that we always have diverse shortlists for every significant role that we have at the organization. Therefore, kind of ensuring that there is an equal playing field of individuals coming into the organization. And then secondly, the other piece that we really want to make sure that we're doing is retaining that talent within the organization when we bring them in. So there's no point bringing in diverse talent if diverse talent isn't leaving the organization. So retaining that diverse talent and then focusing on their acceleration and growth. And again, looking at 2 or 3 key pockets within the organization, again, just to really make sure that we've got some real results at the end of these initiatives and programs that we're designing.
And do you find you have to change your recruitment processes in order to inspire a more diverse talent to actually apply, or to the businesses, or do you think it's just in the actual recruitment itself when taking the
I mean,
forms you've already got?
yeah, look. I think it's a bit of everything, really. So, as an example to that, I think when I was coming into this organization, I probably didn't appreciate how much effort and emphasis it placed on things like diversity and inclusion. So, from a branding perspective, that's a huge opportunity for us to correct that, and that's one of our key pieces of work this year in terms of how do we promote not only the fact that we are an organization that values that the diversity and inclusion, but actually how do we also express a point of view on this on a regular basis. So the more you talk about it, the more people connect the London Stock Exchange Group to this whole ethos of inclusion and belonging. So that's definitely one pathway. And then, yeah, we've got to look at our hiring processes continuously from an improvement perspective and say, what do we need to do to make this more seamless? What do we need to do to make this more efficient? How do we make sure that we're fostering a real inclusive hiring process for all roles across all regions, across all levels?
Yeah,
So I think
yeah.
I don't think it's one thing. I think it's you've got to look at it in totality, and I think you can always get better. I don't think there's I will never on this particular topic ever accept that we've got it nailed. I think we'll always be able to do better.
Brilliant. That's good. That's fantastic. So let's go back to HR in general, and let's think about the people that are listening and HR roles. So what do you think makes a good kind of a HR person?
That's a really good question. I think there's different facets to it. I think the function's really changing. So I think with everything going forward, so maybe this is not just specifically to HR, but this increased ability for us to collect data and be analytical has just kind of almost changed the opportunity that's presented itself for HR. So I think in the past, you'd always be valued as a strong sounding board for senior leaders to be able to make decisions. So that ability to almost think about all aspects of evidence that exist within an organization and support a leader to make the right decision on in service of the organization was always one of those critical skill sets that I think an HR person would need to have. And now you can also then rely upon that alongside the analytics and data to also kind of support or validate some of those decisions. So I think you've got this amazing ability now as an HR person to rely upon both non-quantifiable evidence plus quantifiable evidence to really support decision making. I think that's certainly one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is, I think, that real strong understanding of what the organization is trying to achieve. And I think that's so important because regardless of which part of HR you work in, it has to be in service of the goals, the vision, the strategy of the organization. You asked me a question earlier about, when you think about things like recruitment, across the globe, how do you make sure you do that in the right way? Well, we have to do what's right for the organization and focus on the most important aspects for the organization. If we believe tech talent, it's an example, it's not a fact, is the most important part of this organization's success or future success, then as an HR person or a recruiter in that scenario, that the talent that you bring into the organization is going to have such an impact on whether the organization is successful or not. In a different way, we all know that strong leadership at an organization can make or break whether that organization is successful. So your leadership strategy or development strategy has to dovetail to what your organization's trying to achieve. And so my second point is you've just got to really understand the business and make sure everything that you design as a service or a product that sits within HR is relevant and supports the growth of the organization.
You just, in a nutshell, you sum that up. It's like you are, the HR function is that incredible linchpin because you are the people that are bringing the talent in, you're nurturing that talent, and then you're giving the leadership the information on that talent to inform them to make decisions. Oh, it's brilliant.
I think as a combination between the way I always look at it is, if you've got your really strong, let's say if you're a product type organization, let's take Apple as an example. You've got your designers of the product. They're the people that create the thing that you sell to the market. You've got your leaders who ensure that the business runs as well as it can do, and you've got functions like HR and finance who support the organization, whether it's a people decision or a very quantifiable commercial decision based on the numbers. And collectively, that is it. Those parts of the organization are the cogs that turn it and ensure that it's successful. And I think the more an organization has all that connectivity between the different divisions and departments that it has, is really a measure of success. And I think HR plays a key enabler to that for every organization, albeit you may be a product or a service organization, etc., etc.
No, yeah, that's really interesting. So tell me more about your own personal leadership style.
It's a very broad question, I think. I think for me it's been a journey. I think the best thing about being a leader is that you never stop learning. I think if I look at what sort of leader I was the first time I became a leader, which was in my mid-20s, to where I am today, it's just completely evolved and changed. And I think, rather than kind of completely answer your question as you've asked, I'll kind of almost talk about it as a bit of a journey. I think you become a leader because you think that's a natural part of your continued growth as an individual. You probably get into leadership for the wrong reasons, because you probably don't understand the ramifications of what you're taking on at that point. I certainly didn't, and made a lot of mistakes along the way. And then you start understanding how leading can actually get the organization further, get you further, get your team further. And then that magic moment happens where you kind of realize actually leadership is not about you, it's actually about others. So it's moving from being selfish to selfless, looking at life through a mirror. Actually, that's what life starts off as, and then it's like looking through life through a window. And so this all this notion of you learn more as you kind of take on more responsibility and accountability of people. And there's a real symmetry between being a leader and being a parent in many ways, because your ultimate role and responsibility is to grow people so that they can do what you did and better. And so I think that's my ambition as a parent, for my children to achieve more than I have, and that should be absolutely the parallel that you think about as a leader. How do you grow the people that work for you so that they can either be as good as they can be, or more realistically better than you are today?
Yeah, that's good. True, very true, very true. That's makes sustainability as well, doesn't it, and growth.
It does, yeah.
I to see that you've also got executive coaching qualifications, and some of the focus you have is on CEOs of not-for-profits. One of the things you talk about there is helping people with self-limiting beliefs. And I feel that is something that, especially with the students and young people that we support, is something that we're forever trying to combat, is self-limiting beliefs. Also standing and feeling like you, or what's the word? You don't have the right to be somewhere. I can't remember the exact terminology. So could you just give us a bit of an understanding of how that works, and any tools or any things you lack at to support people with self-limiting beliefs?
I think some of the really interesting, it's really broad, but I think one of the way I really got into this, and the time I actually did my exec coaching qualifications, I was actually based in Asia, so I was pretty much based there, and I started to work with, and this was definitely by accident, not through me kind of intentionally planning this in any shape or form, working with quite a number of, just the only way I could describe them were just super talented female leaders out in Asia. And it was really interesting that the more you got to see them in action, they had every single element of capability nailed in order to take on bigger and broader roles, and yet it just wasn't happening. And so the pattern, that's how I got into it, because there was this pattern of some of these really talented females that I this was unbelievable, not actually moving up. And I started working with a few of them, and coaching is coaching is like a voyage of discovery in many ways, right? And I never went there and thought, well, the reason why person X hasn't got there is because they have self-limiting beliefs. But the more you kind of work with them, you realize it wasn't about their capability. It was purely this notion, very much what you described, that, well, quite frankly, I don't even deserve to be where I am today, never mind do a bigger job, because comparatively, I'm not as good as person X, or I'm not as good as, in many cases, male colleague B. And the more you kind of unwind it, it's trying to help people understand that thought process isn't wrong, because it's not a case of being wrong or right, but that thought process that they have isn't objectively based. It's what they hold deeply within themselves. And it's trying to create that space or reflection for those individuals to start almost objectively looking at some of those beliefs and really challenging themselves as to why that belief exists. And the more you do that and almost start applying logic to it, the person realizes that when you say it like that, or when you describe it like that, or when I objectively view it, that doesn't make sense. However, I still feel it inside. And that's what you've got to try and overcome. So first, it's almost convincing the logical brain that thought process may be flawed, or that thought process is not objective. And then the next piece is then creating the real emotional connection to that objectivity. And that's tricky. And, some of the most simple things that I would work with some of these leaders on was the ability, and this sounds really silly, but it really makes a difference, the ability to say thank you when someone gives you a compliment. And whilst that just sounds like, well, of course you'd say thank you, what would often happen in that scenario where somebody says, oh, do you know what, you did a fantastic job, they'd be like, answer would be, I think this is what I could have done better. Or it would be, well, actually, it wasn't really me, it was a combination of this, and this. And almost training that, it is a bit like training. It's training yourself to almost say, thank you. And even doing that can make such a material impact on someone's ability to start accepting positive feedback. If you start accepting positive feedback, you might start believing in some of that feedback that people are giving you. So that's again really challenging things in an objective way, and trying to move people into being gracious with compliments rather than pushing those compliments back whenever they're presented with them.
I always think that, I do think that, and I've seen this myself in my contemporaries as a female and a woman who has had children, are in 9 bit older than a lot of people are watching, but that there is sometimes, and not across the board, but that difference between male and female. Males will be much more gung-ho about something. Of course I can do it, and go for it. And a female will naturally look at all the obstacles and be much more self-depreciating. So it's great to learn these things, and just, and I think about that day to day, that I need to remember that, there's in an environment,
I mean, honestly, just even at home, sometimes we talk about stuff like this, and my wife is infinitely smarter and infinitely more talented than I am in so many facets. And sometimes, she'll say, oh, I don't think I could do that. And regardless of whatever she's tried to achieve in her life, she's been successful, if not overachieved in those scenarios. But her first default position is, I don't think I could do that. And it's really interesting. And I, often challenge her on it, and she'll say, no, I think you could do that, but I couldn't do that. And she's infinitely smarter and infinitely more capable than I am. And yet, there is, even between husband and wife there's a slight nuance or difference in perspective of what can be achieved. So really interesting.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. So if we go back to we haven't got much longer now, but I want to ask you a couple of things. I want to ask you what your career high has been to date, and then I want to also ask you to give some tips to people about 2 things. One, about if they're making choices to go to university and they're wanting to go into like a talent area, what it might be. And also, if they're leaving university, tips to get into a more of an HR role. So that's 3 things: career high, tips about choosing university courses, and tips about then accessing kind of a talent or HR career?
Which one shall I take first? Which one would you like me to cover off first?
Do you know what? Do the tips first, and then career high we'll end on. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So do you know what? I wish if I kind of was to go back and to when I was kind of almost choosing my A levels, I didn't really have. Interestingly, I was the first person in my family to ever go to university. So that kind of navigating both that further education piece and then career was kind of, I kind of felt a little bit on my own, if that made sense, in terms of a support network. I think if people have got if they've got people that they know who've kind of been there, done that, go and talk to people, because I learned a lot having chosen my subjects and chosen my degree subject and then done on. I don't think there's a wrong answer, by the way, because I did psychology. I could have done something else. I could have still ended up here, right? So I don't necessarily think the choice of degree, if you want to get into this type of role, is going to hold you back. My wife took a very similar pathway to I did initially. She's now moved on to a COO type role, but she initially started off life in that HR lane, and she did biomedical sciences. I did psychology, which is much more closely related to people who often work in HR. I got here and she did the same thing. So I don't think necessarily a choice of degree at this stage makes a massive difference should you want to go into this type of field. I think the reality is, if you want to do something a little bit more vocation, if I definitely wanted to be a lawyer, I should have probably done law, if that makes sense. So if you've got a real clear indication of what you want to do, which is much more vocational, I think, if you want to be a doctor, you kind of got to do medicine. And if you want to be an accountant, maybe some sort of finance type degree would make much more sense. So I think if it's a bit more broad and open, and you want to work in a commercial role, whether that's in a company like London Stock Exchange or any other major organisation, I think there's a bit of freedom for you to kind of choose what you really enjoy. I think if someone had said that to me, I probably would have done a history degree, because that's what I really enjoyed doing. But I felt I should do something which would lead to a pathway. But absolutely don't think it makes a huge difference, as long as you've got interest in that career thereafter to continue to learn.
And that's something we say to people a lot. Just touched on the point that you obviously first generation to go to university, and also you spoke about the fact that you did apply to Oxbridge, or did you get to go to interview at for Oxford? Did you go? It's just,
yeah, I did.
I'm aware.
I did, yeah. I did go for the interview, yeah.
But I am aware, and I'm speaking to a lot of people, and also people of your generation in the past, that that often there's not a lot of support around that. You don't really know what you're letting yourself in for when you say, one, you might go to Oxbridge, but two, if you're the first generation to go to university, your parents don't have a Scooby-Doo. Where do you go if your careers team, if you don't have that? Where do you go to find that information? Or you just said, oh, I speak to other people. Do you think there is any advice you can give in hindsight of what you could have done more, or what you could have done better, if you know that your family network will not support you, will not be able to support you? Where would you go?
I mean, the simple answer to that is I just didn't know all of that what you've just described. So I think when I kind of remember arriving at Queen's College for my interview, it was a resident. You had to stay over because it was kind of 2 days worth of assessment and interviews. And as I started to meet people in the evening, we had dinner together, all of the people who were being interviewed at Queen's for different subjects. I kind of saw all of these individuals who'd been really well prepped and rehearsed into how they would effectively kind of talk through themselves as individuals in order to show that well-rounded individual that could be a real asset to Queen's at Oxford, or I'm sure that would be the same whether it was a different college across Cambridge or Oxford. Whereas I think because I hadn't really had anyone step me through what this would even look like, quite frankly, I just wasn't as well prepared, nor had what I would describe as the extracurricular record of achievement that some of the other people had. I mean, I did clean fridges at Marks and Spencer's, and I did work a couple of other jobs too, just to kind of put a bit of money in my pocket as well. But it was a lack of understanding as to what the expectations were for for that type of interview. Did I do well? Did I do terrible? I'll never really know. I never ended up with the place. But I think the value that anyone who has either been through that, or the value that anyone making decisions whether to go or not to go, I would have loved that. So if I was encouraged to apply to Oxford by my principal when I was in my A levels, because he said, I think you've got the capability to go. What I probably didn't leverage as well was to ask more around what would I need to show or demonstrate to these individuals around my candidacy for that. And that's if you really, really want to go. I think if you don't really, really want to go, don't go. Because I think you should never be forced into thinking, well, it's Oxford, I'd be a fool not to go. I don't think that's right. I think you go where you feel comfortable, and I think you go where you want to go. But I think if you genuinely want to go to an Oxbridge type university, then I think leveraging any person who's either been through it, or leveraging those individuals at your school, colleges, etc., who can provide a bit more context, ask more questions. I'd say if you don't have anyone to talk to, try and leverage the people at your academic institution and ask more questions around it.
Yeah, or you can ask the talent hub, and we can help as well.
Or you can ask the talent hub.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So the last question is, and we really haven't got much time. So the last question I want to say, as we said, was, what has been, do you think, your career high, and why?
I think my career high was probably, I would say probably about 5 or 6 years ago, when I ended up leaving the region, Asia, having lived and worked there for a while. And when I left the region, I got this memory book that so many people had contributed to, and it was a kind of like a series of photos and kind of like words of wisdom and kind of memories, and it was beautiful, and it was one of those really touching gifts that you'll kind of cherish for the rest of your life. And when I read a few of the things that people had written, it was a lot of it was centered around leadership and the impact of the leadership that I portrayed to them, that I'd had on themselves. And I think when you kind of read the impact that you've had on people in a positive way, I think it kind of makes you realize that if that's what you do, and that helps other people to grow and develop, that's the ultimate career high that you can have. So that was definitely my career high.
Brilliant. Oh, thank you. And thank you for all your insights. We covered loads of different topics, and that's absolutely great. And I really value your time today, because I know you're a very busy man. So Jig, thank you very much. And as I said, this will be available online for people to tap into and get some insights as well. So have a great rest of the day and weekend. And thank you
very much for inviting me. Really appreciate it.